Focus on Headline. And let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have our reporters in Choi Ji-hee and Yoon Suk Yeol. Guys, welcome back.
Good evening. Happy Thursday. Oh my God, what's wrong with my voice?
Puberty. You're going through puberty now, or you've been very tired is what it is.
Sorry,
you have used your...
me.
I'm sure all of our listeners do understand. Let's delve into something that hasn't happened in quite a while. Although we would like to say I wouldn't say it's like a complete trilateral summit, but is as close as you can get. We're talking about the trilateral summit between South Korea, China, and Japan. This is going to happen next week. And according to the Foreign Ministry, you had Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol speaking by phone with his Japanese counterpart, Yoko Kamikawa, on Wednesday to discuss the upcoming trilateral summit involving China as well, though President Xi Jinping is not going to be part of this trilateral summit. You have Chinese Premier Li Qiang who's going to take part instead. Nevertheless, Ji-hee, obviously good news. It's been a long-awaited trilateral summit. A lot of discussions certainly needed from the three sides. Ji, let's start us off. What's the latest we have on this?
Right. So first Deputy Director of the National Security Office, Kim Tae-yeol, announced earlier today that the three-way summit is scheduled for May 26th to 27th. And during a 35-minute discussion, Minister Cho Tae-yeol expressed optimism that the upcoming three-way summit would provide impetus for South Korea and Japan to further enhance their bilateral relations, as well as building on the close communication between their leaders. And Kamikawa, in response, proposed continued cooperation to ensure the successful hosting of the upcoming trilateral summit by Seoul. And this would be the 9th summit among the three countries, being held for the first time in 4 years and 5 months. Now, during that phone conversation, Cho and Kamikawa also discussed unresolved bilateral issues, although Cho's office did not provide further details except the issue on the messenger app Line, which Tae-young will tell us more about later on. And meanwhile, Japan's Kyodo News reported that South Korea and Japan were in discussions earlier this morning to hold a summit between the two leaders and on the sidelines of the trilateral summit. And regarding this, Security Advisor Kim also said that it was decided that South Korea and Japan, the two leaders, will hold a bilateral summit on the 27th, the second day of the three-way summit. And the last three-way summit was, in fact, held for the 8th time in Chengdu, China, back in December 2019.
That's right. And, there was a number of issues at hand why it has been delayed for so long. You had the pandemic situation right shortly after the 2019 year. It's 2020 January when we had the first cases, and China obviously having the first country to kind of report on it. Xi Jinping has mentioned that maybe, if the pandemic situation eases, that, they'll get back into action here. But at the same time, we had very, very sour ties between South Korea and Japan. And so that was kind of delaying things. And then now you have the Yoon administration, which things are very friendly. Things are very friendly with Japan. And so they're cool with this. But now Xi Jinping not coming to Korea for whatever reason it may be. Instead, you have Chinese Premier Li Qiang. But in the related news, and Ji-hee did mention briefly on this, that President Yoon Suk Yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida are scheduled to hold that bilateral summit on the sidelines of this trilateral meeting. And according to Kyodo News, the South Korean and Japanese governments are coordinating the two leaders to meet on May 26th is what it is. Seoul, let's get more on this.
Right. According to the Yongsan Presidential Office, President Yoon Suk Yeol is expected to hold bilateral meetings with both Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on the first day, the 26th, ahead of the trilateral summit between leaders of Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing that is scheduled for the 27th. And in his meeting with Prime Minister Li Qiang, President Yoon is expected to discuss enhancing strategic communication between the two countries, expanding economic and trade cooperation, creating a favorable investment environment in China, promoting cultural exchanges, and cooperating on regional and global issues, including the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Particularly if a separate meeting between Yoon and Kishida goes ahead, it will be the first time the two leaders have met in about 6 months since the APEC summit in San Francisco last November. And this time, President Yoon will exchange views with Prime Minister Kishida on ways to boost practical cooperation between the two nations. And they will also discuss the situation on the Korean Peninsula, joint actions between South Korea, the United States, and Japan, and regional and global cooperation, including in the Indo-Pacific region, according to the presidential office. So, security issues and trilateral partnership among Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo are also expected to be major topics of discussion this time too.
Yeah, and how is China going to respond to that is a big question, right? That it's always been, anytime they talk about this trilateral military collaboration or cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, China, Beijing has been very upset about that. But here's the thing. Over the past 2+ years now, slightly over 2 years since the Yoon administration kicked off their 5-year term in office, things have improved a great deal. With Japan, despite the fact that there's been a number of very sensitive issues, especially like the historical issues, right? And that's been, we can say, in somewhat resolved. They did agree that the South Korean government and South Korean corporations will be in charge of the compensation for the forced labor issues, which, even despite the fact that it had upset a number of Koreans, it did make things much better when it comes to bilateral relations. However, this time around, it's a little bit different because they have been talking about a lot of things that's been easily resolved. But as Ji-hee briefly mentioned, the big news is over the controversy over the LY Corporation incident, the Line Yahoo incident, where there was an administrative guidance issued by the Japanese government on Naver, so that SoftBank, who has the 50% joint venture with Naver, takes over the entire capital here, and now the government has expressed their intention, the South Korean government has expressed their intention to do whatever it can to protect the South Korean companies and its people. And Naver came out recently saying that they are not interested in selling the stakes, which now complicates things here. Seong, will this issue be then discussed between the two leaders?
Well, according to Japanese reports, yes, the Line Yahoo incident is also expected to be addressed. And Kyodo News reported that in connection with the personal information leak from the messenger app Line, the Japanese Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications has requested that Line Yahoo reconsider its capital relationship with South Korean company Naver. It said, however, this issue has sparked backlash among South Koreans, so it is likely to be discussed as a topic for the summit. Though South Korea's official stance on addressing the Line Yahoo incident at the summit has not yet been announced. Additionally, the two leaders are expected to agree to continue communication at all levels, including heads of state, as next year marks the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations between Seoul and Tokyo. And this agreement is likely to include promoting exchanges among lawmakers, economic sectors, and cultural circles. Further, Prime Minister Kishida plans to once again ask the South Korean government for a combined effort in resolving the issue of Japanese citizens abducted by North Korea. Like mentioned above, apart from the Yahoo Line incident, Line Yahoo incident, there have been various sensitive issues between the two countries over the past 6 months that the two leaders need to discuss and exchange candid opinions on, such as territorial claims over Dokdo Island and historical issues in new Japanese middle school textbooks. Hence, there is keen interest in what other topics South Korea will bring to the table besides security, cooperation, and cultural exchanges.
Yeah, but see, the thing with it shouldn't even be a dispute over Dokdo Islets, right? But the false claims over the territorial claims, the false territorial claims of Dokdo Islets, it's something that happens on an annual basis, right? So I almost feel like this is not even going to be talked about, because what's Japan going to do? Okay, sure. Oh, President Yoon, we do acknowledge your concerns, and yes, we will never make our false claims, and it's not going to happen. The textbooks, all of that stuff, it's not going to happen. So that's been the criticism so far, right? I mean, it is true that the bilateral relations between Seoul and Tokyo has improved quite a bit, but the criticism amongst the South Koreans is what has South Korea gotten involved, which is why this whole thing with Line Yahoo incident is very, very big. And this is a very good opportunity for the Korean government, the Yoon administration, to really come out and say, we are now going to fight for what is ours, right? And that is the 50% that Naver has, and they're going to try to protect Naver. The consensus right now is that if President Yoon does not bring up the Line Yahoo Corporation issue during the talks with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, then it's going to lead to more backlash from the South Korean people, and the sentiment again goes against the Yoon administration. But this is, if you look at all the things that they've said, because all the things that because Japan only cites the data leak, right? But then in actuality, let's say even if Naver does decide to sell their stakes of the 50% that they have, the data leak information stuff, all the data centers are in South Korea. So what are you going to do with all the data centers? Are you going to move all of them, which takes years, first of all, to create a facility and all of the equipments that are needed in order to set up it's not a small data center. We have like a data center in the back that's pretty small, but it's not like that. It's a massive, massive infrastructure. Are they going to be able to build all that stuff? If they're truly worried about the data leaks, then they should focus on the data centers, not just the capital. And so there's been a lot of criticism towards the Japanese government for kind of hiding the fact that they're more interested in the capital and SoftBank taking over 100% of Line Yahoo rather than the data leak being the big problem here. But we'll see what happens. Again, next week is the trilateral summit. We'll get a better picture of what topics the leaders are going to discuss. And of course, we will cover all that and more for all our listeners out there. China, meanwhile, criticizing South Korean and Japanese lawmakers for visiting Taiwan, for attending Taiwan's so-called inauguration ceremony of its newly elected president, despite China's strong opposition. I like how they didn't say anything about the Russian president's inauguration, the participation for that. Chi, let's get all about what this is all about.
Sure. So Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te, who won the January election, was officially sworn in on Monday. However, China strongly opposes visits by lawmakers from both South Korea and Japan, and the Chinese embassies in both countries have expressed their objections and lodged formal complaints with the two countries. Now, the Chinese embassy in Korea filed a complaint on Tuesday against ruling People Power Party Representative Cho Kyung-tae and other lawmakers for attending the inauguration ceremony of the Taiwanese president the day before, stating that it violates Beijing's One China policy. In a press statement, the embassy spokesperson said Representative Cho and others made an unauthorized visit to Taiwan on May 20th and attended the so-called leaders' inauguration ceremony despite China's strong protests. And the spokesperson also said the visit is a blatant ignorance of the One China policy and the spirit of the joint communique of the diplomatic relations between China and Korea, which sends the wrong signal to Taiwanese independent separatists and runs counter to the strategic cooperative partnership between the two countries. Now, Korea did not send an official delegation to the inauguration ceremony, but Iuno, a representative of the Korean mission in Taipei, and Representative Cho, who heads the Korean-Taiwan Parliamentary Friendship Association, attended the event. And despite the growing economic partnership with Taiwan and Korea, Korea is not reinstating its diplomatic ties with the country, which was severed in 1992 when it established relations with China out of respect for the One China policy. So as a result, Seoul has abstained from sending government delegations to Taiwan's political ceremonies, although individual lawmakers like Cho and former Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Chung Woo-taek, have made visits to Taipei before. Now, meanwhile, China has started 2 days of military drills in the water and airspace around the self-governing island of Taiwan, just 3 days after the inauguration of the Taiwanese president, whom Beijing has labeled as a quote-unquote separatist and a troublemaker. And Taiwan's defense ministry has condemned China's military exercises around the self-ruled island as irrational provocations.
Yeah, the whole issue with that is very, very complicated, and it's very sensitive, which is why when Nancy Pelosi, was it 2 years ago, had visited Taiwan. That was as ugly as it can get between Washington and Beijing. And so this is, I guess you could, there is no diplomatic ties between South Korea and Taiwan, as Ji-hee mentioned, but there is still some connection. There's trade that's going on, and so you need to still establish that relationship, which is why I think they did the bare minimal in kind of taking part in the ceremony here, but they're still irking Beijing. The Seoul ministerial statement. This is a significant outcome of the AI Seoul Summit co-hosted by South Korea and Britain. This was adopted with the participation from 28 countries. Seyoung, let's get more on this.
On Wednesday, the Seoul ministerial statement was adopted during the ministerial session of the AI Seoul Summit held at the Korea Institute of Science and Technology in Seoul. And this summit, co-hosted by South Korea and the United Kingdom, took place over 2 days on the 21st and 22nd. And the first day featured the virtual summit of heads of state, while the second day included a ministerial meeting. And the ministerial session was chaired by South Korea's Minister of Science and ICT, Lee Jong-ho, and the UK Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Michelle Donnellan, and attended by representatives from 21 nations, including the United States, Japan, France, Germany, Canada, Australia, the European Union, and the United Nations as well. Additionally, key figures from leading companies such as Samsung Electronics, SK Telecom, LG AI Research Institute, Google DeepMind, and Anthropic, as well as representatives from academia and civil society also participated. And they collectively agreed on the importance of international cooperation to achieve balanced development, recognizing both the economic and social value that AI can generate and the societal challenges it poses at the same time.
And the previous day's summit session also involved in-depth discussions on securing resilience against potential negative impacts of AI.
Right, and such warning messages echo sentiments previously emphasized by President Yoon Suk Yeol during the summit session. And based on these discussions, the Seoul ministerial statement was adopted, focusing on promoting AI safety, innovation, and inclusivity. This declaration includes South Korea's vision for AI and semiconductor technology to address the substantial power consumption associated with AI proliferation, including the development of low-power semiconductors. And the government highlighted the significance of hosting this summit in South Korea, a non-English speaking country at a time when global AI governance discussions are predominantly led by English-speaking nations. Meanwhile, UK Secretary Michelle Donnellan, in her closing remarks, also addressed the growing threats of deep fake and deep voice technologies, emphasizing that AI, being a human creation, is subject to human control and direction, and she stressed the importance of establishing systems to respond to AI risk.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier was like watermarks. Put in a system in place where if people are using AI deepfake programs, that the companies that are creating these systems put in a watermark system so that anytime it's fake, you can tell that it's fake. But the problem with this is, again, I mean, we have a large number of countries that are taking part in this, but it takes an entire world, every country to get involved with this, right? And so there are other countries that are building up AI technology, and if not, they're not in the same page with some of the other groups of countries that are participating in this AI summit, then they could easily go the other way here. And you can tell that the AI technology is the big thing. I think NVIDIA, it came out recently, NVIDIA's first quarter profits up something like over 340% the first quarter of this year, which means that, yeah, there's going to be a lot of use of AI technology, which also means a lot of troubling things that can be used for as well. Let's move on here. Today, for many of the progressive voters and progressive lawmakers and progressive leaders, a very solemn day because it is the 15th anniversary of the death of former President Roh Moo-hyun, who is largely considered a very well-known progressive South Korean president. You had actually lawmakers from both the ruling and opposition parties paying a visit to Roh's hometown to pay respect. He also paid a visit to former President Moon after the service as well. Ji, let's get the details of this.
Sure. So leaders of the ruling and opposition parties gathered in Pongha village in Kimhae today to mark the 15th anniversary of the death of former President Roh Moo-hyun. Now, the ruling party leadership, including Emergency Committee Chairman Hwang Woo-yeol, hosted the former President Moon Jae-in's former President Moon Jae-in after the memorial service. Now, the service for the 15th anniversary of former President Roh Moo-hyun's death took place at 2 p.m. and lasted about an hour at his hometown Pongha village in Kimhae. And the theme was today's actions are tomorrow's history, which is a phrase that Roh used in one of his speeches back in 2004. Now, the ceremony was attended by the bereaved family members, including Mrs. Kwon Yang-suk, former President Moon Jae-in, and from the government, there was Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and Presidential Office Chief Hong Chul-ho as well. And from the political arena, the ruling and opposition leaders will gather, including Chairman Hwang Woo-yeol of the People Power Party, as well as Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party and Cho Kuk of the National Innovation Party. Now, the Democratic Party and the National Innovation Party will be represented by all members-elect of the 22nd National Assembly. And this morning, during a leadership meeting, Hwang Woo-yeol said Roh emphasized forming a political culture that prioritizes the people over party politics and solved problems through compromise. And so he hoped the new Democratic Party leadership would work together to implement this kind of politics that Roh had dreamed of. And after the memorial service, Hwang and other members of the PPP leadership traveled to Pyeongsan village in Yangsan, South Gyeongsang province, to visit former President Moon. And this was the first time the ruling party leader had visited Pyeongsan village since Moon had left office.
Yeah, just a quick correction. Hong Chul-ho being the presidential senior secretary for political affairs, although he was kind of put into the top office around the same time that the new chief of staff was picked as well. This is interesting because, again, Hwang Woo-yeol is the interim leader for the PPP, is widely considered as probably one of the most conservative politicians in Korea, and former President Roh Moo-hyun being considered one of the more progressive former president in Korea's history. But if you're wondering why Prime Minister Han Duck-soo took part in this, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo actually served as the prime minister for the former progressive government that under Roh Moo-hyun. And I think that was basically what the Yoon administration was aiming for when they selected Han Duck-soo as the prime minister, is someone that probably had bipartisan support, was what it is, right? Because he is largely considered a Roh Moo-hyun person back in the days. But actually, Roh Moo-hyun was also looking for someone that had both sides of the things, who had a progressive and conservative side, and he was known as the people's president, was what he was widely known as. But really unfortunate the way that his life ended. Let's move on here. Recent development regarding the resumption of short selling in the stock market. The presidential office announced on the 22nd, that was Wednesday, that short selling would not resume until a reliable system for investors is in place. Now, this stands in contrast to the Financial Supervisory Service Chief Lee Bo-kyun's earlier remarks about potentially resuming short selling in June. For the consensus amongst the foreign investors, though, not having short selling really loses a lot of credibility for the stock market here in South Korea. But there has been a lot of complaint amongst the retail investors here in South Korea about short selling. But nevertheless, Qiang, let's get more on this.
Well, previously on May 16th, Financial Supervisory Service Chief Lee Bo-kyun stated his personal hope to partially resume short selling in June, which had been banned since November of last year. Despite clarifying that this was his personal opinion, his comments were interpreted as an indication that the ban might be lifted soon, because obviously he is the head of FFS. However, the presidential office firmly dismissed the possibility of resuming short selling at this time. A senior official from the presidential office emphasized that Yi's remarks were his personal wishes and reiterated that short selling would not resume until a trustworthy system for investors is established. This announcement follows recent criticism of the government for proposing unvalid policies such as the now retracted overseas direct purchase regulations and a policy to restrict some elderly drivers' licenses, which was also reversed within a day after backlash over infringing on elderly mobility rights. Indeed, the establishment of a policy coordination body by the presidential office and the ruling party aims to address these issues, but the first meeting of this body highlighted a discrepancy between the presidential office and the financial supervisory service on the timing of resuming short selling. So as the government continues to face criticism for its inconsistent policy directions, there is hope that the newly formed policy coordination body will lead to more carefully considered and unified policies in the future.
Yeah, so again, so short selling, simply put, is you're betting on the price to go down, and you make money off of that. And because right now the South Korean stock market is largely dominated by foreign investors and institutional investors, but more the foreign investors, they're saying that when a large group of foreign investors basically start shorting, it's the retail investors who are just basically losing a large chunk of that. But you could kind of, I mean, I think South Korea might be one of the few countries where they have established stock markets where they have banned short selling. And so a lot of the foreign investors who, I mean, that's the thing, it's betting, right? And I always say that stock market is like legal gambling anyways. And so you're betting on either the price of a certain stock to go up or down. And so when you're betting on it to go down, I mean, if it goes up, you're losing money anyways.
Right.
But they're saying because there's so much money in foreign investors and they could just short a whole bunch, it's just going to, the retail investors don't have the time and money to react to that. And they end up losing all of this, which is why the foreign investors are going, if you guys don't have short selling in South Korea, it's going to basically force a lot of the foreign investors to not invest in South Korean stocks, and it's not going to look good. And so, but there is a reason why the government's not been kind of banning short sale. It's lasted longer than they initially anticipated. As Seong mentioned, the government has been receiving somewhat of a criticism over the series of confusion and inconvenience caused to the public because of these recent public changes and the flip-flops. Yes, no, we're going to do it. No, we're not going to do it. This including the earlier mentioned short selling ban. Gee, let's get more on some of these other confusing policy changes.
Sure. So the government and the ruling party have decided to hold weekly high-level policy meetings, this following a series of confusion over government policies. And this includes the overseas direct purchases and the reversal of the elderly driver restriction, and as Seong has talked about, a ban on short selling. Now, the Democratic Party raised the level of criticism, saying that the repeated reversal of words when public opinion was bad was an admission of literal translation, quote-unquote, power leakage. And following the withdrawal of the overseas direct purchase regulation, the government's review of the elderly driver qualification restriction was now also an issue. And on the 20th, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, as well as the National Policy Agency, announced a policy to introduce conditional licenses by evaluating the driving ability of the elderly. However, within just a day after controversies such as discrimination against the elderly and disregard for the vulnerable, they changed the target to quote-unquote high-risk drivers, saying that it was not aimed at a specific age group. And in response to the criticism that the policy decisions were flawed, the government and ruling party decided to hold this weekly high-level policy meetings to prevent a recurrence of such confusion. And in a recent closed-door meeting within the ruling party, the government was reportedly rebuked for the frequent policy confusion and changes, suggesting that public sentiment has been deeply disturbed. And a senior official in the presidential office also said that the government will continue to communicate closely with the party, focusing on policies that directly affect people's lives. And the Democratic Party, meanwhile, has criticized the government and the ruling party's successive policy blunders, pointing out that if Yoon claimed to have been unaware, it would demonstrate a serious leak of presidential power over government policies.
Granted, though, right, they are admitting that it was maybe a mistake and they've changed their policy. I mean, it would have been worse to just kind of go, yeah, it's a mistake, but we're not going to acknowledge our mistake and we're just going to push for this because we're afraid to admit that this was a mistake. But like a lot of the things that they're pushing for, there are some reasonable understandable reason for why they put in place, right? Like even with the restriction on the elderly driving, there's been a number of cases recently where elderly drivers have caused deaths. Let's just put it that way. I think there was one where a man in his like upper 80s drove his car to like a senior center and mistakenly did the acceleration instead of the brake and rammed into a group of other senior citizens who were going into the senior centers and killed one of the senior citizens. And this happens like many times. And so that's the reason why. But what's a high-risk driver? Like what considers a high-risk driver? And technically, everybody could be considered a high-risk driver. Who is and who is not? Is it based on points? And because even if it's based on points, your driver's license gets suspended if you have 100 points or something like that. And even with the overseas, direct purchases, because there's been some concerns, health concerns, cancerous materials coming out from some of these goods from China. And so that was what it is. But it was before public sentiment, like they put in got the opinions from the public and they jumped the gun and made the policy change right up. Or they announced a potential policy change before asking the public was, I think, the biggest criticism here. Let's move on, talk about the economy this time. Not surprising, the Bank of Korea holding its benchmark interest rate steady for the 11th straight session at 3.5%. What was it, the last time this happened? The first time it happened was February of last year. Wow. Seoul, let's get more on this.
On this Thursday morning, the Bank of Korea's Monetary Policy Committee convened its May meeting at the Bank of Korea headquarters in Seoul. There, the Bank of Korea once again held the benchmark interest rate at 3.5%, continuing its tight monetary policy stance. And the decision reflects concerns that lowering rates too soon, while the consumer price inflation rate has not sufficiently fallen to the target level of 2%, could reignite inflation as well as issues related to the exchange rate, household debt, and the real estate market. Further, with the U.S. Federal Reserve not rushing to cut rates, the BOK says no clear reason to risk a rising $1 exchange rate and potential capital outflows by lowering rates first, which would further widen the already significant interest rate gap with the U.S. currently at 5.25% to 5.50%. And this reasoning underpins today's decision to maintain the current rates.
Yeah, the housing market right now, I think, is slowly stabilizing in that it's slowly going down. But of course, obviously bad news for people that bought houses at peak. But yeah, once
peak?
But unlike some people, I don't live in Gangnam, and so it wasn't a very expensive house.
Still, you bought a house.
I bought a house, but it was a very affordable house. It's not a multi-complex system put in place where we have like gyms and stuff like that. It's a very humble apartment, but I didn't take out a massive loan on this. I bought something that was more affordable in my bank.
Your house is still lovely.
Well,
I saw the pictures of them on your Instagram. Yeah,
when you have two kids, it's not lovely after work. But no, this is the big scare, right? And then so like once they start, cutting rates, that the real estate market is going to jump again, and there's going to be high prices, and people are going to be unable to afford homes, and it's already unaffordable, by the way. But some other figures here: Korean economy projected to grow 2.5% this year. This according to the central bank. Once again, Jihi, you have more on this.
Right. So while the Bank of Korea maintained the key rate for the 11th consecutive session, the growth outlook for the economy was revised up to 2.5% from February's forecast of 2.1%. Now, this was supported by Korea's unexpected quarter-on-quarter growth of 1.3% in the January to March period. And BOK's Governor Lee Chang-yong said during a press conference that the economy is expected to improve at a solid pace, as indicated by strong export growth amid an upturn in the IT sector and the recovery of major economies. Now, the growth trajectory of consumption is likely to show an upward trend. He said the first quarter growth, which beat a market estimate of 0.6%, was backed by robust net exports as outbound shipments surged faster with energy imports declining sharply due to warm winter months. But then the BOK governor said second quarter growth is likely to slow down due to dwindling construction investments and a slowdown in consumption and lower contributions from net exports. And Lee said the economy will bounce back in the second half. The central bank left its inflation forecast at 2.6% for this year, and Lee said inflation remains elevated due to stronger growth and the depreciation of the Korean won. But further upward price pressure is mitigated by recovering consumption with price control measures put in place.
You know, the dwindling construction investments, this is a big one right now. It's been actually going down for some quite time now, several quarters. And what's happening right now is many companies had planned constructions of these massive housing projects or these apartment complexes. But because it's so expensive right now, and the reason why it's expensive is because they bought the land, right? They had to somehow make the money. They're not trying to profit as much as possible. They paid that much for the land during the peak when real estate prices were going crazy. And because of the high interest rate, no one's willing to buy this. No one's taking out massive loans, yet the prices of these apartments are very high. There are many, you know how you have like the lottery system put in place where you try to get it as cheap as possible?
Yes.
It's not cheap anymore. It's very, very expensive. And so a lot of these companies have empty lots. No one's putting in lottery for these apartments. And we've already talked about one group that is on the brink of filing for bankruptcy. I don't know what happened to that group, by the way. And so once the construction companies are going to go down, that is going to be terrible stuff for the South Korean economy. Let's quickly move on to our final piece here. 3 European countries, this including Norway, announced that their recognition of Palestine as a state. Now, the decision aims to implement this two-state solution for the coexistence of Israel and Palestine. Obviously, Israel doesn't want that, and this really to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Sam, let's get more on this.
Well, the European Union member states Norway, Ireland, and Spain have formally declared their recognition of Palestine as a state, and this decision of implementing the two-state solution was made in pursuit of peace in the Middle East. Palestine has the leaders of 3 nations asserted that Palestine has a right to establish an independent state and urged more countries to join in recognizing it. Of course, in response, Israel has heavily criticized the intentions of some European countries in recognizing Palestine, claiming it is a reward for terrorism.
Yeah, just a quick correction. Actually, Norway is not part of the EU. It's just, I believe Ireland is part of Norway and Spain is part of the EU. But there is a growing number of EU states that are coming out hinting that they might start recognizing Palestine as a state, which Benjamin Netanyahu was very upset. He called it prize for terrorism is what he said. Guys, thank you as always for your reports. Have a safe one, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.